So what does this keyword import, what is it replacing? Yeah, this is the exact same as saying require React or const React equals require React. This is just the newer syntax. It's easier to look at. So you say import space, the thing you're trying to import, this is the variable. This is what you're calling it from, and then you tell it the node module package to pull it from. If it's not a node module package, if it's your own file, then you say / my file is over here, but we'll get there shortly. Lastly on this page, write react dom.render. So this is what connects us to our HTML file. Yeah. Let me make sure the link is in Slack, because this one has been, my account got taken by another teacher. One sec, I'll get the link back out. Perfect. Okay, react.render. This is saying what, this gives us two arguments that we need to give it. What to render is argument 1, and where to render is argument 2. Now this is going to look a little strange, but as the first argument, I just want you to write an h1 tag with the word hello world in between the tags. After the h1, you'll add a comma, and you'll write document.getElement by ID root. And immediately you'll see it show up on the page. Or you should. If you don't, let me know. Debug. Looks like hello world is showing up. Oh, that's mine. Okay. That may, okay. Common mistake. Is everyone getting? Oh, and the errors will be plentiful today. React DOM is not defined. That one, yeah, we'll hit that one much. Anyone else that's not popped up? Just sure. Yeah, the dollars that imported is actual anywhere. Our hello world showing up. This is just the beginning. Everyone get a hello world? Yay. Okay, so brief, what just happened? Well, our source folder is our application. This is where we write all of our code for the front end. And the very top level file that every source folder needs is an index.js that has this exact line, except we can swap out what it renders, but we'll always be rendering it to the document's ID of root. Because again, if we go back to that public folder and say, where is my application going to live? It's living in this div with the ID of root. Now, there's not a script file. These aren't linked together right now. That is what Babel and Webpack are doing for us. But that is the div that we're selecting when we write this line in the render. But it wouldn't make much sense to put our entire application inside of this method. So there's got to be a way to break things apart. Is there any questions up to this point, though?
So everything will come separately.
Yeah, everything will live in that div. Our entire application is in that one div. That's just where it puts it at the end. It's fantastic. All right, so how do we split things into these reusable component pieces? Well, it's with JavaScript, because what type of file am I in right now? JS. Everything in React is a JS file. I mean, you'll still have CSS files if you want to use styling that way, but you could also do all your styling inside of this. So yeah, pretty much just JS files other than some CSS here and there. And components are the way that we make things reusable. So the first way, there's two main ways to make a component. Technically three now, but let's look at the first standard way. This is the functional component, also known as a stateless or display component. And this will make more sense with more context, but this is the first type of component we're going to use for the first couple days. What do we think this component looks like, denoted by its name? It looks like a function, because it is. Components are functions, so this is where your function knowledge is going to be helpful coming in. So let's make a component called hello world. So I'll make a function called hello world. What's different about that function declaration? It's capitalized and it's not a constructor. This is a React syntax. You capitalize all of your functions because they are components. And that's how React reads them. Now, what must a function do in JavaScript for us to get any data from it? Return? Cool. So we will say return and then open and close parentheses and hit enter. So you kind of get that set up. Now in this return statement, I'll tell it what it wants to return, or what I want it to show to the DOM. So I'm going to take this h1 out of my render, and I'm going to put it right inside of this return statement. And things just got weird. Why is that weird? Why does this look strange? Yeah, when have we ever been able to return HTML from a JavaScript function? Yeah, okay, we could play with JSON, did you say? Yeah, but those aren't, yeah. So this actually is not HTML. It looks like it, it acts like it, but this is referred to as JSX. It's a hybrid. Think of HTML and JavaScript smashed together in one. We get JSX. The ability to write HTML in a JavaScript function and still have our function know what we're talking about. So now where I had my hello world before, I'm going to use my function component. I'm going to say opening caret bracket. Sorry, I need to wait for my keyboard to, it's going to wig out if I press anything. And then I'll put my component in here. Just hoping this, okay, that was nice. And then self-close it. Not with a question mark, with a forward slash, but I'm at the mercy of my computer right now. Okay, just like that. Neat. Get that hello world to show up. So when you make your own component, they typically are going to be self-closing like this. You don't have an opening and closing tag. You can, and later down in the course, we will have our own opening and closing component tags. But for the first week or two, you're just going to be working with self-closing tags because essentially that's all you really need for all the functionality we're given. But you just use the function name just as you would a div or something, and you put it right inside of the tag. and it will run this function and return whatever JSX you want to render, making it show up on the DOM. But this looks a little strange, right? And how is this tied to this function? So quick overview of how functions work, because that's how this works. Let's say I wrote a function called sum that took two numbers. What a great idea. And it returns those two numbers. Okay, so I've created my function just like I created my component. So nothing changed except I can return JSX. I don't have to return pure JavaScript. Now, if I wanted to call this function and pass in two numbers, what is the syntax to do that? Sum and two numbers, yeah. And this will take 30 and 10 and return the sum of 40. Here's this function declaration as the component. When I say sum parentheses, that is how this looks. Same thing. So this is how you call a function in React. It looks like a tag, but it's doing this. It's calling your function, and in this place, this will evaluate to whatever the function returns, which is just this h1. Call the function, it executes, it returns, and not that many times. Never, I was gonna say it never gets old, but it's pretty old. No, we just broke one of the biggest rules of React. Oh, my computer did, not, okay. Yeah, if I put it in a div, but then it's gonna print 900 of those as well. But did you get that though? Saying my function here is the exact same thing as saying this. It's whatever this function returns. When I call it, I have to call it with carets, not with parentheses.
Question.
Yeah.
Is it possible to use the arrow functions?
Yes, arrow functions are totally fine. If you don't want to use ES5, you can say const hello world equals a component that does the following. It'll do the same thing. So either syntax for your function declarations will be fine.
Could you also like ignore the return statement and use arrow functions?
Yes. This is still JavaScript, so if I have a single return, I can just say return that. And that'll work as well. So making a component doesn't have to be enormous. It still follows JavaScript rules. We'll keep it like this for the time being. Okay, well, let's say I wanted to use 5 of these, or let's say I wanted to return a couple of these H1s together. This is breaking a cardinal rule of React. Now read this message, tell me what it's telling me. What is it saying is problem on line 8? Yeah. Well, what it's saying is I can't return 3 different things. That's like trying to tell a React function to return, try to return A plus B, but also return C plus D. I'm trying to return multiple things. A function can't do that, and a React function is a function. It can't do that. C plus debugger. So if I want to return multiple things, in JavaScript, I'd have to put them all in an object or an array. In JSX, I need to make sure they have a common parent element. So if I put all these in a div, now I'm only returning one thing. I'm returning this div, and the div has 3 things inside of it, but that's fine. The return is only hitting the one element. So I couldn't say also return this, because that's breaking the rule. I'm now returning 2 divs. Jason Jessup. This is just a rule of React, yeah. You can't return more than one item. If you are, it has to be wrapped in one item. So that the top of what's being returned is still a singular item. Singular div or singular some sort of container. You'll quickly get over that error because you'll see it a bunch. One thing that we like about React is their dev tooling. When they yell at you for an error, they are very explicit most of the time, unless you've done messed up way big. But most of the time, they know exactly what went wrong and will give you the line number and a brief explanation. Cool. Well, while this is nice, if I'm building my whole application on my index.js, it doesn't make any sense. Why are we using React to break things apart if I'm writing it all in the same file still? So let's make this work, but let's put this function in another file. So in our folder structure here inside of source, let's make an app.js, capital A. This is the top level component of every application you'll make. In every new file you make, you still need to tell it what it's using. So we need to import React from React. That's it for now. The index.js, we had to import React DOM. This is the only place you'll necessarily have to import that at, because you only have to write this once. I want you to render this item at this location. That's only on the index.js. As soon as we go to the app.js or further down, building our components, we just import React, and then we can declare our component, say function app. It returns an H1 with hello world. Its own little file. We just haven't done that step yet. But we're about to. Yeah, because now these files can't talk yet. There's no like automatic talking capability because we're using React. We still need to make this one, app.js, available to the index. So we used to say module.exports, but now we have the new keywords. We have import, and with import, we also get export. So for all of our components on each individual file, we'll say export default your component name or your function name, app. And this makes it available to the rest of your app, whoever needs to import it and use it. So I'll split that to the side and then open up the index.js. So here's the app.js that we just created and exported. Well, I don't want my hello world function anymore. It's useless. But I do want to use my app components. Right after the import of React DOM, I'm going to import app from ./app.js to let it know the app.js file you're looking for is on the same level as my index.js file. Just like the require keyword. Oh, come on. And now it's as simple as saying, what do you want me to render? Render my app component. And our hello world will pop up. Cool. Bless you. Did everyone get this hello world to pop up? I'll give you another minute or two. It's a bit more. And when you're first working in React, that's the one complaint I'll get is, isn't this more typing? At first, yes, every file needs to be set up. Once those files are set up, you never have to touch that code again unless it breaks, but you can reuse it as much as you need. Now, are you kind of already thinking like, could I make another file like navbar.js, export it, and use it in my app component? Yes, that is the next step. We can now build other components that we can import to our app.js file and use in here that will then be exported and rendered to the DOM. The function, yeah. Now, so when I say export default, it's saying what do you want to default or export from this file? I'm saying this component. And then when I say import app from this, I have to call it app. It will say I didn't find a default export called app. And then we tell what file it's being exported from. So right here and here, the naming convention is important because import will look for this specific export.
So even it has to be capitalized also.
Yep, every component is capitalized, the file name and the function name. If not, you'll start running into some errors later down. Right now you wouldn't see a difference, but this is the convention. So if you're writing React with lowercase functions and files, it'll look different than the way that everyone else does it. Yeah. Well, this website isn't interesting just yet, so let's make another component. What do I mean by making another component? Yeah, let's make another file. So in the source folder, let's make a navbar.js. And then, to be fair, we won't really be able to build navbars for about a week because there's a package we have to learn to do it. But just for the sake of example of piecing this together, this will be a static navbar. It doesn't do anything. But what do I need on every file to get started with React? I got to import React from React. Now try to declare a navbar component. I'm going to stop right here and let you try it for a few minutes. Create a navbar component, however you want it to look, export it, then import it to your app.js file and use it inside of your app.js component. So you're going to build it in this file, export it, you'll import it on your app.js file, and use it so that it shows up on the DOM. And we'll go over this in like 2 or 3 minutes.
Is there a reason why in this file you capitalize navbar?
Every file that's a component will be capitalized. So app, navbar, index.js is not a component, it's the top level renderer. So we don't capitalize that, but everything else will be.
What is the command again to get the React server?
So you open up the terminal and say npm start.
Oh, it was what does npm run do?
npm run is for commands that are non-default commands. So instead of the word start, if you wanted the word boot up my React server, you can't say npm boot up my React server. You'd have to say npm run boot up my React server because it's not a default command that Node recognizes. But Node knows what start means, so you don't have to say run start, even though you could. It'll do the same thing.
So if I just did npm run, nothing else, would mess anything up?
It might just default start, yeah. And I'll make a little fake navbar here for a sec. There's my navbar. how do I get this navbar available to other places of my application? Export default navbar. And then where do I want to use the navbar? App.js or index.js? Okay, so if I go to the index.js, I'm already telling it what to render. I can't tell it I can't put multiple components in here. So that, and I'm going to keep app here. App will always be my top level component. So I can't put navbar in here. Where else could I put it to make it show up? Yes. So in my app component, I can say import my navbar and use it here. But then it breaks. What cardinal rule have I broken? I'm trying to return two things at once. So that if we want to fix that, we got to wrap it in a div or some sort of container. And this is pretty cool. I wrote my navbar somewhere else, I exported it, I brought it into my app.js file and used it, and it just rendered it out on the DOM for me.
How would you spell?
That's what we're getting to next. What's on? Of course. Panic. So is there any questions about this connection or why we used app instead of index.js? It's just like it's a pattern to memorize. You write a function in one place, you export it, call it in another, and it just represents the piece of the UI that you want to render there. Oh, what are these?
We're trying to delete stuff off.
I like this one. Cool. Index import has to be lowercase. Hey, Grant. How's it going? Okay, that's all that needed, I think. Then all components must be uppercase. And then this one just needs to be finished and exported. Again with the lowercase import. Oh, and when you do an npm start, you can't be in the source folder, so cd back one. Yeah. So with this little example though, can you see how if I wanted to build a website, it would end up looking something like this? How many files have I just said my program will have? Yeah, 5 files. Each file representing a different piece. Now maybe more than that, maybe main is like the big middle section. In the middle section, there's many items inside of it that we make components for. So just before we jump into styling, one quick note on that and how to visually look and think about React. Sketch. Sweet. So this is how you want to think in React. We have our index.js file. This is the top level of our application. Is it a component? Is the index.js file a component? No. It's not capitalized. It's not a function. All it does is says, hey, React, React, you render this component on this place on the HTML page. So this app component right here represents our entire application, which means from here, we're going to be branching downwards. We start off with app, but then it branches off to navbar and header and all these different pieces. So the way to think of that is index.js is what tells our app.js where to load. The app.js can then load its own individual components that were written elsewhere. So maybe we have a nav component, a main, another one, and then footer. And maybe nav is a component that renders out a bunch of nav link components. You know, for those, main might render out a article, other components we write. But what's happening here? What kind of structure am I building? Tree. It is a tree, just like the DOM. The top level is our app.js, and from there we render out different components that themselves can render out different components that are then composed into what the user sees, depending on how we composed. Right, so think tree-like structure, app is at the top, index.js says this is where to put this, and from app.js we branch off to every other part of our app. So the first exercise we're going to give you today after cover styling is to make a business homepage in React, just to try to get used to that building block mentality. But we need to talk briefly about styling here so we can see that. So I'm going to keep my navbar component, but I'm also going to make a header component. Oops. Header.js. Div with an H1 in it, the big header. And I know I'm kind of flying through this. If you want to build this component, I'll hold on for a second. We're just going to use this in the navbar for styling. So I made a new file called header.js. I put this code in it. And then on my app.js, I'm going to import it. And I'm going to use it right underneath my navbar. Sure the website's showing it real quick. Yeah, so there's the website right now. The big header. So with how we've been coding things, what is the most common CSS selector you've been using for styling? Classes and IDs, yeah. IDs work the same way as they do with regular HTML. However, most of the things you write in React are going to be reusable, which should say only use classes unless you know for sure you're only going to use this once. So classes, though, what does the word class mean in JavaScript? If I write the word class, does it know it's a CSS class? No, it's a constructor function. So you can't actually use the word class to give something a class. Bummer. You can give it something called a class name, though, so we'll use that instead. Yeah, so on my app.js file on this div, I'm going to give it a class name. It's camel cased, set to the string app. I'm making this up, app container. So wherever you used to write something like this, class, now you're going to say class name. It has to be that word. I'm also going to go to my navbar and give that div a class name of navbar. I'm also going to go to my header and give that div a class name of header. So all of my divs have classes on them right now. Now you can do inline styling, but we're going to cover the CSS sheet way of styling first because it's going to keep your React code cleaner and easier to follow. But with those 3 class names applied, I can now go into my source folder, again, where my entire app will be. Every file I make must be in here. And I'll just make our regular style.css file. So now I've got 3 components, my index.js and a style.css. Let's look at the app container first. So that's my first class I'm going to play with. The syntax in your CSS sheets are the exact same as you've been doing it, no different. So I grabbed it by its class name versus its class, but it's the same syntax, it's still just a class. And I'm going to say, give my entire application a border of 1 pixel, solid blue. And I'm also going to, actually, I'll make that like 5 pixels so it's easier to see. I'm also going to use the star selector to get rid of all my margin, just because I don't want margin. But as you notice, has my CSS taken effect? No. I'm using the right class name. The class name is being used on the app, but I still need to make these 2 talk. You can't use the export keyword on a style CSS sheet, but you can import it. So on my app.js file, I'm going to import, and instead of saying import this from this, all I need is the word import. I'll say import my style.css page. And now my CSS is connected. You can. Yeah, even if I use 10 different style sheets and imported them on 10 different pages, it's still 1 sheet. So if you use the same class name or something like that, you'll run into problems. So honestly, it doesn't matter where I import my style sheet, my whole app knows about it. So I can import it on my index.js if I think that looks cleaner. I can do it on the app.js, or I can make a style sheet per file if I want to. But just know at the end of the day, they're all 1 big style sheet. And if you write conflicting code, they will conflict. To prove this, I've imported the style sheet on my app.js, but now I'm going to style my navbar. So in here, I'll grab my navbar and make it a flex box with it's centered. Let's do space around, maybe a slightly smaller font size. No, smaller. Take off the underlines. Oh well. So are you seeing how the class names correlate with classes? I add the class name to whatever I want to style, and I can style it like regular. So if I wanted to style these A tags, and I don't want to give them their own classes, how could I use the navbar class to style them? Yeah, so these rules all still work the same. So traversing CSS selectors works the same way. For example, even though this div is on a different page than these divs, it's still a parent. whether it's a parent, a grandparent of some sort. If you open up your Elements tools when your React app is loaded, and you look at the dev tools, you don't see anything crazy in here. You see your div with the ID of root. There's my app container div. Inside of it, there's my navbar div, there's my header div. So everything comes out looking like it normally does on an HTML page, but we didn't have to write it this way. We just put the blocks where they should be put. Cool. So there's the root, there's a whole app as it's been bundled and compiled and put in our application. Now there's also something called the React DevTools. And what this does is it shows your Elements console, but as their component names. So I can see app, I can see navbar and header, and I can open these up to see what's inside of them. Kind of giving me an idea of once all this is thrown on the page, how does it look? It lets me look through. So I would suggest downloading these. You'll go to anywhere in your Chrome and say React DevTools. And it's the React Developer Tools for Google Chrome, so it's this page here. And you'll just hit Add to Chrome. And then any website that you're visiting that uses React, you can open up the React DevTools and see all the components. So you go to Airbnb.com and you'll see what a full-scale React application looks like. It's truly terrifying. It's pretty cool though. So you got React Developer Tools to visualize your components. You've got your regular elements and sources and console to look at things. We'll end up using React Developer Tools quite a bit. Any questions?